You are native Penobscot.
I'm Penobscot, yeah. Yep. And so we moved up here, and I had always just considered it my home, you know, and I'd spend my summers in Connecticut with my dad, and so there was always this back and forthness kind of, and I didn't really, a lot of things in my life, sorry if I ramble, I got my COVID booster this morning, and so like that's why I have the jacket, I'm a little chilly, and like, yeah, I meant, you were given it, yeah, if I fall, yeah, you were mentioning who won stuff, and I don't know if you heard me, but I was like, say my name. He didn't though, but, and then I was tempted to say, why don't you list all the things that didn't win, and then it would have like been easier to, but no, I grew up on the res, and you know, there was a lot of stuff in my life that just impeded my ability to do well in school or to focus on school. You know, I think a lot of it is in some ways in Night of the Living Res, you know, just the types of violence that I'd seen, the addiction I'd seen, each of which is still a problem in our community on the island, but in Maine in general, you know. I think in the real Maine, you know, the ones that people don't think about, you know, the counties and stuff. And so I really didn't do that well in school, you know. I was a terrible speller, I really was. I couldn't spell.
Were you a writer?
No, but I was a storyteller. I was a storyteller.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that's
Oral.
yeah, that's a, if Ms. Ennis was here, she'd, was my math teacher in high school, she would always say, you're telling, she'd laugh at my stories, but they were always true, and she'd never believe them, but anyways, but I failed English in my freshman year, and I had to,
that was where?
That was at Orono High School.
At Orono High School.
Yeah,
okay.
so I failed English my freshman year. I had to take it in summer school. Isn't that right? I deserved to fail that one, but I came back real strong though. I almost made it, but I didn't pass. But yeah, so I. Yeah, right. Yeah,
That's right.
Yeah.
You can tell everything.
Yeah. So, but yeah, no, I just didn't. Education wasn't a focus really, but I love storytelling. You know, I always, when we were outside, my friends and I, you know, now looking back, I realize I was the person who kind of held all the stories of the stuff
Reminds
that
me of
happened.
Gizos in this book.
Kind of like that, yeah. He was, you know, I kind of was like him in a way. Like whatever happened, I remembered it, and I, you know, if we'd be around a fire, you know, smoking cigarettes or whatnot, you know, I'd be the one to let the story out.
Would you?
know,
were these fictional stories, or were
there were things that had happened, you know.
that you might embellish?
Yeah, just you know, to get us laughing, you know, for the night, you know, because we'd be out and it'd be cold. I mean, we'd go outside, it'd be -10, and we'd be, you know, around a fire, and there's only this one, Sabatis, he was a Sabat, or he is a Sabatis. He was the one who could light a fire if it was like -100, like he just could. So he would get the fire going, and I'd get the stories going about stuff, just things that had happened and that were funny, and then we'd tease each other, you know. But I applied to Maine, and I didn't get accepted as a student. Now I teach there, but
Just poetic justice.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah. Imagine if like they were like, "We're offering you the job." I'm like, "No," but I went to EMCC for 3 years, and
that's Eastern Maine Community
College. Yeah, and I just started. I started to really read. Like I found myself in a space where I wasn't in those situations, you know, that made it difficult to learn and difficult to study and those sorts of things. And I recognized in just a book form, I was like, I know how to do this, but like orally. And so I just started writing very badly and very poorly.
And very secretly?
And very...
Or would you share it?
No, I never really shared it. No, I actually would share a lot of it with my mom, which I heard once somebody said, they're like, if you write something and you're afraid to show your parents, then like you've written something good, you know. But I'd write like stuff, and she'd be like, I don't remember that happening, you know, because we were just honest with each other. And but no, I had a mentor at EMCC, John Goldfine, who was and still is, you know, I consider to be like my mentor, who I go back to in memory and who I still talk to. But he taught me a lot about writing.
And then you went on to Dartmouth?
I did. I transferred from a community college
Not
to an
bad for
Ivy
somebody
League,
that was flunking English in high school.
No, I know. And then I realized I was allergic to Ivy by the time I graduated, you know, so, yeah.
Well, let's move on to the book, because as I said, I was looking at Charles and looking at you. And of course, there's one huge difference. I mean, chronologically, there are some similarities. He came to the reservation as a young child and left it for reasons different than yours at 18.
Yeah, I never
basically
regret it,
he was forced off it, essentially.
Yep. Yeah.
But the biggest difference is that Charles was white and you were native.
Yeah.
And I mean, I can't think of a more fundamental difference in terms of the story here, how one's life ensues from that point. So talk to us. I want to just touch on this notion of other, or belonging, or not belonging. And what I found so tragic, I guess, for Charles is that he grew up on the reservation thinking he was of the reservation, and then you know, at 18, even while Frederick, his father, God bless him, is still alive, he has to move across the river, and Frederick has to build him a house. I get the feeling at that point, and almost from that point on, that Charles belongs to no one.
Yeah, he's nothing by that point. You know, he's neither. It's so difficult to talk about Charles's like desire, you know, because like to make a character real, you know, they have to have a want. You know, they want something, but he's kept his, you know, repressed ever since, you know, Mary had decided to say, you know, I'm going to say our child belongs to this native man, so she could be.
He wants to be a father.
Yeah, he does, and I mean, he never really. I mean, he had a father. He had Frederick, but it wasn't a blood, you know, relationship. Right. But nonetheless, it was his father, and he is just this. It's so strange because, like I said, you hear like a character needs to have desires, yet he, at times when you're like, well, what is he wanting? He still feels very real and present. And I think that is representative of a lot of people who like, they have desires, but they're just not in motion. You know what I mean? Like they're not going anywhere. And so he was this kind of stuck. He was just stuck.
There's a routine to his life.
Just a routine. That's it. Just a simple, you know.
Louise, Bobby.
Yeah, Louise, Bobby, and even before that, I mean, it was just his job, you know, felling trees, right? And, you know, coming home and watching his daughter, you know, that was his life, and like that was it, you know. And then there's Bobby, right? The randomness.
Yeah, we'll get to Bobby. But Bobby's everyone's best friend.
He is, yeah. He's my best friend in the book. So,
well, let me ask you that, because we'll get to Bobby. But what was you created Charles? So, and very often, I think, as a writer, you have a relationship of sorts with that character. What's your take on Charles? Did you like Charles?
I like Charles, yeah. And I think he's...
Did you feel sorry for him?
Yes, yeah, I do. I feel sorry for him. I also don't feel sorry for him. I think that's like... I feel like when you feel indifferent about like certain things, that's when you get a good character, someone who like you don't like but you like, you know. I mean, like.
Let me throw in a question. We had some questions submitted by our audience prior to tonight, and boy, some of them were really good, and a couple of them pertain to Charles. So
cool.
I'm going to read this one. It's a little long, but bear with me. As one gets to know Charles, it feels like he's always selling himself short. Yes, he has his struggles, but but regarding his indigenous father, he dismisses the validity of his lineage through most of the book. Charles' view of himself contrasts the perspective his friends have regarding their adopted baby. This would be Gizo's.
Yep.
The baby's adoptive parents are Penobscot and Lakota, but one of the fathers muses that even with the two new cultures in the baby's future, he'll always be tied to his home community. And this reader wants to know if this juxtaposition was intentional, where it's a little deep.
Yeah.
But what he's saying is you'll always be connected back. Was that the case with Charles?
As in feeling like at one point feeling like he comes back to feeling like
or
he's
that he
Penobscot,
can't. Yeah.
I think it's a cyclical thing for him in the book. He's at times he says things where he doesn't say he's Penobscot, but the way he's talking would suggest that he has this authoritative, like, oh, I am indigenous. But then at times he's like, I have no claim to say I'm this, right? And so in my mind, there's two things happening. There's like this genetic association with being part of, a specific group, but then there's the non-genetic,
the bloodline,
aspect, right? And then there's the non-blood aspect, right? Where you are just like, you are family, regardless. I'm thinking of a student, I should say writer. I would consider her a peer, but she was adopted from Chile during the time when Americans were going and taking a lot of babies, and she grew up in a very white household, but was dark skinned, had been adopted, and she taught herself Spanish growing up and had gone back and all this crazy stuff. But it's like, despite that, she loves her parents, despite
there's a tension there.
Yeah. And I think in every family there's a tension. There has to be. And this is just a very strange one, right? But not so strange because it's actually factual, and that this can, this scenario can happen. It can.
Sure.
And I imagine it probably has, so.
Let me, one other Charles question, and this kind of goes to you as the writer, you as the creator of Charles. Sometimes the reader's understanding of Charles and his mental health outpaces Charles' own self-understanding. What's it like to write a character that you know very well, but who doesn't quite know himself yet?
Well, I feel like I'm always chasing after the characters. Like it's hard to keep up with them. They tend to know. Because I will say this version here is I rewrote the book, so this is the 6th rewrite, a complete rewrite. Wow. So I had 5 rewrite. Some people have like 40, or 50, they really.
Sounds painful.
Oh God, my hand, no, I had to type. My fingers bled, but no, this one was the final one that I stuck with, because I realized I found the point of view, I found the voice, I found Charles, and then I had to navigate it. And you begin to, through those subsequent drafts, you just know them so intimately enough that they feel like they're part of you. Like when you enter into that mode of writing, or at least for me, when I enter that mode of writing, I feel like I'm writing about somebody I actually know.
Is it almost like they're directing you instead of you directing them?
Yeah, because it's like, well, if this person's real, how can I foretell their future? And so I adopt that attitude when I write. I have a friend who says that my fiction reminds them a lot of my my nonfiction, in that it feels very viscerally real, in that you know the people.
Yes, I would agree with that, because in terms of the sense of place and the movement of the story.
Yeah.
I found myself, and it's always, I think, the sign of a good book when you start you start emotionally attaching to the book as the reader, and you start rooting for certain characters or getting really PO'd at others, and you start having this emotional stake in the story.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is something I had throughout this. You know, there were times
Well, that's good.
with various characters
Yeah.
where, you know, I wanted to, same character, one minute you want to cheer them and slap them in the back, the other, then you want to kick them in the butt. You know,
Yeah.
they're those kind of folks, which
Yeah.
are very real people. You know?
Yeah.
Let me, about the rewrites, I'm just curious, what drove that? Was it an editor or was it you?
It was just me.
It was
just,
you? Just not feeling satisfied.
not not knowing it wasn't what it was supposed to be. You know, I mean, this isn't my first novel I've written. I've written like 5 different novels. You know what I mean? Like, you gotta get them all out, you
Right.
know, and then you've acquired, I suppose, the skills to do, you know, to set. I'll write another novel probably, and it will not turn out at all. I could rewrite it. You know, this is one that just hit. You know, I had come to a point in my career where I was like, okay, I can do it now. You know, I was strong enough. I had worked out, metaphorically, right, to
Yeah.
write it. And
Yeah.
so your question was, is what propelled me to do it?
Just
It's
your
just
own standard, your own.
yeah, it
wanting
was
to
my
get
own. I just knew it was not right
Okay.
because the first version was third person omniscient. So I had like, I was everywhere. I was, I mean, when this book
in and
came
out of
out-
people's heads.
Yeah, and in and out of places,
Yeah.
you know. I wrote it in a multiple perspective way, in that it was from Mary's point of view, Roger's point of view. I did Louise's up until her dementia really kicked in, because then I felt like I had no real
How can you
control
navigate
over.
that?
Yeah, that was very difficult. I wrote it as an epistolary, in an epistolary form. I wrote a long version, well, almost a long version. It was like 70 to 90 pages of Charles not looking at Elizabeth. Like, it was the same thing. Each book had the same engine, which was that
The longing.
yeah,
Yeah.
of this child that couldn't be his because their mother wanted her to be an enrolled member. But it was like 70 to 90 pages of, there's a scene where he goes to borrow a snowplow during the storm next to,
Yes.
a little boy lived in that house and didn't have a father, and he would always go over and like start fires and stuff at at Charles's house, and Charles would be like, "You little bastard, what are you doing?" And he they kind of got close, and he started to tell him the story of his daughter, or he was like gearing up for it, and I was like, no, I'm like literally looking in the wrong direction. Like, I'm like, not, you know what I mean? Like, I'm looking away from the reservation. I was like, I need to look across the river at that house. And it was then that I was like,
Which means that we're looking too.
yeah, which means we're all looking
Right,
at it.
right.
And not even just, I mean, everybody,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
I think, yeah.
You mentioned Louise, and I want to move on to her for a minute, because the relationship between Charles and Louise is complex, to say the least. But first, you took on a very, very difficult subject, and that's dementia. I'll throw in, and I loved how you handled it, because my own mother had dementia and passed away from complications about 15, almost 20 years ago. And I was my sister and I were the two people who were kind of the point people, you know, with her before she moved into a place where she was taken care of. And even after that, I was in touch with her on an almost, sometimes daily basis. And she would call me and she'd call me Billy. She says, "Billy, I just looked in my night table and I don't have any checks." And this was a big thing for her. She always had to have her checkbook nearby. And I'd try to be reason with her, which is, you know, you can't do. And she'd call, I'd say, you don't need checks, we're taking care of it. 5 minutes later, she calls you back, I don't have any checks. The simple solution was to take an old book of checks from an account she and my dad had passed away, that no longer existed. And on my next visit, I went down and just put them in the night table. And when she'd call me and say, I don't have any checks, I'd say, no, look in your night table. Oh, here they are, thank you. And she'd go to sleep peacefully. So that's very much how Charles navigated Louise.
He
in a
did,
lot of
yeah.
ways.
He
Met her where she was,
Yeah,
in other words.
yeah. I don't know how he knew to do that. I think that may have been me a little bit, you know.
Well, let me ask, do you have any previous experience with that in your own life?
Yeah, both my both my grandma on my dad's side had Alzheimer's in her end, and I remember visiting her at this like something manor. It was up in almost into Massachusetts, crossing from Connecticut into Massachusetts, and I went up there with my Aunt Barbara and my dad and my father. Anyways, but I went to go see. What's that?
Another book.
Yeah. We went up there, and I remember just seeing her in her in her bedroom or the room she'd been assigned and given, you know. And I asked where the garbage was, and she was like, "It's right in the kitchen by the refrigerator," and thinking, and I'm like, wow, And then my grandma on my mom's side also had it. The Blessing Tobacco from Night of the Living Res, and then I think there's another story in there too that deals with Alzheimer's. And my mom, well, she didn't have Alzheimer's, and she passed away young. She was 61 when she passed away, so it was 2 years ago. I think, right? Yeah, 3. What year are we in?
24.
All right, so 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, yeah. So she had bacterial meningitis, and at the end of it, she had a lot of memory problems, just a lot of forgetting and a lot of just simple things, and I had to remind her a lot. It was not to the extent of full Alzheimer's, but with my grandmother, though, my mom's side, I interacted much more with her when she had it, and the things they would say sometimes, like there's a line in there, I think, where Louise says something like, "Do you know where you are?" And she's like, "I'm in my bones," or something. And that was something my grandmother said, and I was like, and I looked rude taking my phone out like I was texting, but I was writing it down because it's like, that's like a poetic line in a way.
That's gold.
And and then, but I had experience with it, but I felt confident enough in writing it, and because that story, Night of the Living Res, I workshopped it, and there was a doctor in the workshop, and he was like, "You got this perfect," and I was like, "All right, well, then I don't have to worry about it." Yeah, I know it well enough, I guess, but I just felt like I wasn't done writing about it from that book, and so it carried over into it. But I researched it. I always research everything I do, because I don't want to get anything incorrect. And research led to a pivotal moment in that book, actually.
How so?
Actually surrounding Alzheimer's and the electroconvulsive therapy, the ECT treatments.
That was a surprise.
Yeah.
Because that makes people uncomfortable.
Yeah, people are very skeptical of these ECT treatments when in fact there's been so much progress with it, not just for depression, but in this case I was researching it for depression, but for somehow I came across a study that had been cited numerous times about how ECTs can help reverse Alzheimer's, or at least like alleviate the memory loss, which is the opposite of like when when you go in and you get ECT treatments as like a younger person and you don't have memory problems, you can develop lapses in memory, and I've had family members. Well, my mother did ECT treatments before her meningitis even, so like I had experience with that. But if I hadn't found that detail about the Alzheimer's and ECTs, for those of you who have read the book, think about that one moment, right? Like I never would have figured that out, I never would have seen that. And when I did, I was like surprised. And when you as a writer are surprised, that's a good thing, because
you can pass
odds are the reader's going to be surprised as well. But
let me ask you another Louise
Louise
question. This is from an audience member, and I loved it.
They're here now, or no?
No.
Okay.
They might be. It starts off by the elephant.
All right, the elephant. Yeah.
Besides very literally representing a baby for Louise as her dementia progresses, are there any other figurative reasons why you chose an elephant as the stuffed animal? As in, an elephant never forgets? Which I thought was a fascinating way to put it.
I never made that connection at all until just now. No.
Well, I applaud you for not taking credit
Yeah,
for it.
thank you. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, writers are dumb. They just are. They just are. Yeah. No, I think it was. I think I chose an elephant because actually one day I had gone into one of the dollar stores. Mm-hmm. You knew it. You knew it. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and they'll have the bins of like stuffed animals
Mm-hmm.
or whatever. And my wife was a pre-K teacher at the time, so we'd always go there, and she'd get crafts and stuff, and me, and plus she'd be poking around. So I'm like, I gotta go. And I'll look in the toy section or whatever. And I remember there was like an elephant there, and it didn't make a noise that was supposed to, but it didn't make a noise, and it bothered me. Like it said, it was supposed to make a noise.
Which was why it was at the dollar store.
Yeah, right. Yeah. This is not the $1, $2, $3, $4,
Right.
$5 store that used to exist. Yeah, this was the dollar store, and it said it was supposed to make a noise, but it didn't, and that pissed me off. And for some reason, I guess I was like, well, I'm gonna fix it, and it does. In the book, it does speak.
Well, speaking of the noise creates quite the scene when Charles meets Elizabeth and scares the hell out of her. But then I noticed later on when it's Louise's baby for all that time, does she never squeeze it? It never made another noise.
Yeah, it never spoke after that.
I couldn't help but wonder what if Louise had accidentally sat on it or something,
Well, I love the way she would get in the car with it. Sometimes when like she would want the make it buckled into like a car seat, right? But then at times like she'd like manhandle it in, somehow, I always found that funny. But yeah, I know it doesn't say anything.
No, the last peep out of the elephant is on the dirt road.
It's on the dirt road. That's the last time it talks, and
and I thought we should hear from the elephant.
And that's an interesting parallel too to also Charles's sort of. I don't want to refer to it as active or passive, but his life, like that's kind of when it stops speaking in a way.
Good point.
So
one other thing about Louise, there are times when Charles is coming and going, and I'm thinking, does she recognize him and she's just messing with him, or what is her level of awareness here? Because I swear there are times where was this going on in your head too? There were times where perhaps she was being a little manipulative in that she knew who he was, but wasn't letting on that she knew who he was.
Those moments of writing it and rewriting it, I had that feeling, but I chose not to go in either direction because I felt like to go in either direction
would be to get into her head.
Would be to get into her head, but to draw attention to something that I think wasn't really the point.
Right. Okay.
But there are moments, where like I wonder, like as a reader, like I'm not, and I say this even as a writer, I'm like is she aware of Elizabeth?
No.
Like I sometimes there's language near the end where I'm kind of like, I feel like she knows somehow.
And and it's in the book where there's a reference to she knows.
Yeah, there's like this and other moments, but there is the one deliberate moment where she is teasing him, and all I remember is the word Jesus is in there or something, and he's like, Jesus said it, and she's like, I'm messing with you.
And she laughed and said, I'm messing with you. Yeah.
And I think that was for me, because I remember rewriting it to kind of offset that feeling of like I'm just gonna get it out of everybody's system. Okay, Louise messes with him once, and then that's maybe she's doing it at
and there was one point she did a little upside down smile thing.
Yeah.
Where you're saying, what's going on there?
Yeah.
Let's move on to Frederick, because I don't want to push it here. We're going to run out of time before we know it. Frederick, I saw similarities, and let me know if I'm off track here, but I saw strong similarities between Frederick and Roger in terms of the role that each took on. Yeah. You have this child that is not your biological child, yet you accept, you embrace, you raise this child as your own. Is that coincidental? But I saw a real, because I suppose Frederick and Roger must have known each other at some point.
He was little, and they were
different generations, but it was, maybe I expand that question to include this whole concept of parenthood and what it means, because you talk a lot, and I want to get to this, the whole quantum blood policy, and that recurring theme of blood, like when Charles cuts his finger, and that's the beginning in many ways of when he starts his resolve with Elizabeth, that he wants to confide in her. But these parents, particularly Frederick and Roger, they could not be more of a father, and it looked like, frankly, they could not be a better father.
No, neither of them could.
But they're not. But they're not the father.
Yeah, that's
How do you? Do you just not? That's something that can't be reconciled, or it's just the fact, or is it a bigger statement about these connections transcend
I
biology?
think it's, well, one, I think thinking about it in like a Western sense, it is that, that it does it goes beyond, blood, right? But I think it has more to, it speaks more to, I think, at least, tribal structures around kinship, right? And taking care of, a child who isn't, like yours, which is a big thing in Indian country. We think of the Indian Child Welfare Act. So a lot of, people who, there are children who get placed with Native families, right, that are not, part of that Native tribe, but they try to make them or have them stay with relatives. But we think about, I'm just thinking about like clan systems from various tribes, and I think just subconsciously in my own mind, like that was fighting and at odds with the idea of the nuclear family, right? Because the nuclear family is like really new. It's not an ancient thing. It's on the time that we've been alive.
A Western construct.
Yeah, it's not even, for them it's not even that old, thinking way back. So it's like, I was like, I don't know, sort of this abolishment of it, right? Not really abolishment of it, but like understanding that it doesn't have to be like a unit, like it needs to be some type of collective effort. And I think, like Roger represents that, Frederick represents it, like that they take on those roles, even though it's in different time periods. But then we see how nuclear families also just like don't, or not even nuclear family, I guess nuclear families, blood families don't work out when we think about Jesus and Leno, his father, right? We think about the ways, indigenous communities are not colonized, but have adopted the attitudes of the colonizers at times, right? And so homosexuality, for example,
which again was a daring thing to inject into this story.
I didn't think so until
you didn't.
I don't know. Yeah, no, it's well, no, I got scared when when a friend of mine was like, you need to, Tin House needs to nominate this for a Lambda award. And I was like, no. I was like, why? And like I could see their point of view. I was like, but I'm like,
this is
no,
not
like,
the Gizos story.
Yeah, like this isn't Gizos' narrative. And I mean, I think artists have the rights to write about whatever they like, but they have to choose, wisely what they write about and how they write it. But no, it was more, I think, I just wanted to complicate things. And I think...
Is Gizos based on anyone you knew?
No, actually no.
Because the reason I ask is, what struck me was when the terrible thing happens with Leno and he's chucking the bottles out the window, and then Frederick goes over and the great confrontation.
Which are you talking about, Bobby's version, or are you talking about?
Well, that's a good point, and how these things get changed. I thought that was hilarious. The differences between the two stories, but and in addition, basically, it's that whole, the end result of that wasn't, at least in that moment, that Gizos was outed as being gay.
Yeah.
It was that Charles was outed as, and Charles wasn't gay. And so I kind of braced myself for, oh my God, his life it's gonna be a living hell for this kid. But he seemed to kind of sail through it.
Charles?
Charles, up until when he finally leaves the reservation. And I was like, did people just move on? Were there no? Would you, if you had gone into that more deeply, or were we to assume that there were repercussions for Charles that followed him like through his high school years?
I imagine it did. I think I'm always, I don't know, I suppose my short story mind is like, you know, what gets left out, you know, gives it its strength, and it's like I feel like there's gaps in the book in a way where it's like the reader knows, and there's no wrong answer for what it might be, if it did haunt him or if it just kind of like faded.
You leave a little to the reader's imagination.
Yeah, and I think after that moment, you know, it becomes much more. After that incident, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we were much more present in the immediate story, which is, you know, Charles and Louise, and you know,
and then he
forward.
and Gizos comes around, and they
comes back,
reconcile, and basically the friendship continues, although not quite the same, but it goes on.
It's different. I remember writing that scene when they were kids, when they were coming back together
At the rock,
at the
river.
The river,
River, right. Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know. This actually, they had a fight, but it wasn't about that. This was in an earlier draft, and there was like an intimacy that I felt between these two characters, and I was like, one of them is you know, loves the other, like, you know, more than, you know, like friendship, you know, loves them and wants to love them in an intimate way. And I didn't know who, you know, and like, it's not like I slept on it or anything. And this was in third person actually, so it was kind of like I had like a divide, you know. It was like, I remember it was Gizos who made like the step forward.
Right.
And Charles was
said,
the one,
I can't do
but
that.
Charles kind of hesitated a moment, you know. So there's always been this question in my mind, if, you know, about masculinity as well, you know, like because even later on, there's like these pause moments, you know, when they leave at the hospital, that I wonder, you know, if Charles could have fell in love with him in a way, you know what I mean? And so that was always a possibility in my mind. It didn't go that way, but unless him and Bobby end up getting married down in Florida or something at some point. But seriously, it
Now
is
there's
like,
a sequel. Huh?
Yeah. Yeah, that would be like a Christmas Vacation, but the one they did with freaking Cousin Eddie or whatever, that was like a train wreck.
That's right. Let me ask you about Elizabeth, because she's one of the, throughout most of the book, she's probably one of the most omnipresent characters. I mean, the whole story essentially revolves around her, but she's just this figure that just keeps coming and going across the river, until of course the climactic end and the fire. And as I kind of dusted myself off from that, you know, after the whole the search, that horrible search through the snow and the woods, and Charles running into his whole family house, which is on fire, and Elizabeth sitting there, obviously, you know, thinking that she wants to end it all, and then she shoots him.
Yeah.
Why?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, she had this. All right, we're gonna get all analytical here.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just like. I suppose as a writer, I don't want to make things neat and tidy, because the moment you do that, the moment the story becomes predictable.
In other words, he doesn't go in and scoop her up in his arms and run out.
No. And I was like, well, she has that gun. I'm like, and that gun, you know. It's interesting. The gun is a representation of something that's been passed down both through a bloodline, but then also through non-bloodline, right? So she's holding this weapon that is like blood, like it would have been in hers, you know, in some way, but isn't, but also could have been, right? The whole messy thing, but like.
And she's meeting her father for the first time. I mean,
she's coming face to face with him, really, and she. But I wonder what she's shooting at. Like, is she shooting at Charles, or is she shooting at
that part of her?
What is it? You know?
Yeah.
You want Anne?
Let me just add a question to that. If I found myself wondering if Charles had ever met his father, or been in a similar circumstance with his biological father, would he have reacted similarly? In other words, would he?
how's that song goes? Like, my dad left home when I was 3, didn't leave much for mom and me. It's the Johnny Cash song, and then there's like the big brawl at the end.
Right.
No, I don't know what he would do. He has no desire to meet him, right, throughout the book.
No.
Whereas Jesus is like actively trying to look for his, or had been looking for his mom, right?
Right. No interest at all.
No interest at all,
right.
but maybe he would. He probably would have pulled the trigger at his dad. I'm fascinated actually by Charles's dad because it's like we don't know much about him. So who's to say Charles isn't actually native? You know, there are a lot of indigenous people who, for example, I have someone in my family who is not on the census because one of their parents chooses not to acknowledge their heritage because of a myriad of reasons. And so for all we know, this story could be just, oh, found out my dad was, you're good. We're come on, Mary, come on over here. Yeah, we'll all be one big happy family. But
You bring up the whole census thing, and as I mentioned earlier, the blood quantum policy, which leads us to the Indian Claims Settlement Act, and Frederick, of course. You could almost say that in many ways his life is defined by his opposition to that, and which is kind of prescient if you think about the dialogue, the conversation that's going on around that now as to what happened 44 years ago now, but do you agree with Frederick?
That was not a good deal.
Yeah.
It was a shit deal.
Yeah.
That Claims Settlement Act is it's like reading the first draft of that book. It is. The claims the Maine Indian Claims Settlement Act is just all it did was reinforce. No, all it did was put into law how the state saw us, with a couple things that they couldn't legally override. Right, with federal protection, the ward to a guardian type status that is established very early on in the 1820s through the Marshall Trilogy, 3 court cases, and all the benefits that came, not benefits, but inherent sovereignty that was restored by 1980.
Right.
But also the inherent sovereignty that had been divested and or taken away by acts. And so don't get me. I could go on and on.
I have a feeling that could be another hour.
But I mean, you just think about it. It's like there's a clause at the very end of the Settlement Act somewhere. It reads something like, "Any law or bill passed for the benefit of Indian tribes, talking about in the country, will not apply to Maine tribes unless specifically stated."
They were a tribe apart.
Yeah, it's like nobody's going to sign something and then hand it off. Like, wait, come back here. I got to put Penobscot. Like that.
Right.
No.
Right.
So. We have to fight. And Maine's tribes, I think, are very progressive in that we've gone after a lot of things and have been really successful, even though we're in a very strange
a place of your own.
Yeah,
really.
I mean, we're stuck with like sovereignty that that's from the 80s,
Yeah.
And
we're running out of time.
Yeah,
and we didn't get into the mechanical side of this, but I do want to hear just a little bit about your writing routine. Yeah, I heard or read somewhere that you started this book. Well, you said it went through 5 iterations, or
this is the 6th. Yeah.
6. How did you do it? Was it fits and starts? What is your writing routine in and around teaching? And you're a parent, I understand now.
Yeah, that makes it harder.
Yeah. So are there some days when you write and some days when you don't, or do you have to write every day?
No, I don't know. If I start a project, I see it through. That's that maintains my discipline. I talk a lot about process because if you go pick up any craft book, Stephen King's is on here somewhere on writing, right? The memoir, and
I think that's The Room next door.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
right.
Yeah, and I've read so many craft books, and I've found maybe like 3 or 4 that are like good, you know, and that aren't like this tautological, like,
Yeah.
here's how you write fiction based off of these 5 books, you know,
Right,
these
right,
5
right.
pieces of literature.
Yep,
But
yep.
process, every writer, I think, has to develop their own process, or else they will be depressed, demoralized that they're not living up to the expectations of what like a writer is supposed to be.
Yes.
So I'll go months without working on a new project, but throughout those months I'm reading. You know, I can't not like when I read and I'm like studying. I very rarely pay attention to this. I pay attention to the story, but I'm like, okay, well, how is this working? You know, I look at it more of like a deconstructive thing, but I'll edit pieces, you know, and then tinker with them, finish stories that hadn't been finished. But when I start something, that's when I see it through to the end. If it
Okay.
takes a month, 2,
So
3, 4, 5.
that's a full-time.
It is,
job,
yeah. But
yeah,
I'll take time off
Yeah.
because you need a break. At least I do, anyways.
Before we move off this, I just want to ask you about the title, because when you were talking about the treatment center,
Yeah.
the
Spider.
yeah, the spider, yeah, and the signs.
Yeah.
You had signs, and it had exit, and there were flames.
Yep.
And I thought, okay, that's where the name of the book comes from. But then later on, when the old house is burning down, I'm saying, no, obviously that's it.
Yeah.
At what point did you decide I'm going to call this book Fire Exit?
Oh God, I don't know. It was near the end. I always keep a running list of like titles as I'm writing,
Yeah.
because, you know, there's always those readers who are like love when there's a line in the book that's the title. They're like, yeah, you know, and
Yeah.
like
Right.
they like that they give
The
it 5
little
stars.
bell rings.
Yeah.
Right.
The title I was actually going to give it before was actually a line from the book, which was when Charles is in the near the end in the chase, right?
Yep.
And he says something along the lines of, "My life has always been a pursuit of only remains," but that sounded too much like a what's his name? He won the Nobel Prize. He wrote The Butler, is it? Yeah, I know, right? Yeah. yeah. It sounded too much like yeah, Remains of the Day.
Remains of
Yeah,
the Day. Okay,
I
yeah.
sounded like I was
Yeah.
copying him, so I
Oh,
was like,
okay.
I can't do
It
that.
echoed.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Fire Exit, it was actually fire, comma, exit.
Oh.
And yeah, and I was like, there's a lot of dead writers who are mad, and I don't know why, but I was like, well, I was like, I can still get that effect if we stacked it all. Like if you look at it, it's like fire, exit. Like
Yep.
the pause is still kind of there in a way,
Yeah.
but it had to play with those exit signs. But more so, it's kind of like if you pick up the book and somebody says fire, comma, exit, you know, let's get the fuck out.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
let's get.
yeah.
Oh, I apologize.
Okay.
Let's get out of here. There's a problem.
Right,
Right. And
yeah.
that's what I think this book.
Exactly. Emergency.
Yeah. And I never really wanted to say it until somebody else. Somebody was like, Karen, a good friend, Karen Russell, who I talk to a lot, who has a book coming out in March called The Antidote. It's phenomenal. You know, she was like, I feel like this is a blueprint for like saving ourselves or something. And I never really like felt it like that, but like I understood it as being like a map of some sorts. And like she said that, so I'm not taking the credit of saying
Yeah.
I wrote something that's going to save the New Testament here or something. But like,
Well, it certainly ends on a hopeful note.
it does, yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
that made me feel so good.
Yeah,
You
good.
know, because I didn't want to leave all these people without some
Well,
sense.
except Bobby. Bob's just
Well, Bobby's Bobby. You know, I mean, 16 beers. I don't know how people do that, but that one caught me.
That was
But,
breakfast for him.
Yeah, but I that last 2 or 3 paragraphs, it was like the book ended with a springboard toward hope.
I wanted it. I mean, it needed to. I mean, it was. I feel like the book, as much light as there was, even in those dark moments, there wasn't enough.
Right.
And I'm reminded of that story, Gusev, by Anton Chekhov, if anyone's read it. But it takes place all throughout the dark, underneath the belly of a boat. But Chekhov finds the perfect ending, and it's the sunlight when the character comes out, you know. And so it was like, I just saw that as like the opportunity to go.
Speaking of Stephen King, The Shawshank Redemption, for example,
Yeah,
the way
yeah,
that ends.
yep,
You
yeah.
know, after all this misery and all this, and it ends on this beautiful beach
It
with
has
these 2
that.
men embracing. You
Yep.
know, It's the same kind of feel when
Yeah.
she reaches over and pushes the dirt.
Yeah.
I get tingles just thinking
It
about
was.
it.
I remember
Yeah.
writing that line, and I remember being like, "There's no more." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that's how it felt.
Right.
You know, like literally, like
You know the
somebody
end when it
going-
hits you in the face. Right?
Yeah, and you feel it. You
Yeah,
know, and
right.
it's like, "Geez, I'm crow."
Yeah.
And then, yeah,
We're just about. Oh, we're a little over time.
That's okay.
I'm going to do something daring. Are we good? We can keep going. Okay.
go ahead.
Does anybody? We have such a wonderful audience here tonight. I thought I might throw it out to see if anybody here had any questions or comments you wanted to toss in. Sure. If you could speak loudly, I'll probably repeat it for the folks online. But go ahead.
Sure. Just a little more about the career aspect of stuff, but I'm an unpublished writer, so I know a lot about literary agents. And
I have your question right here. I'm
Oh, you
sorry.
do?
Yeah.
Oh,
Go.
that's okay.
No. Go ahead.
should I read it? No. So I was just curious because I know way too much. So I noticed that your agent changed from this book to now on your website, and I was just curious what made you decide to change agents, and how did it go? Like, was it a tough, smooth process?
it was not easy.
I'm going to just repeat for the audience in case the online audience, if they didn't hear. The question was that you recently changed agents, and the question came from a gentleman who was embarking down that road himself and was wondering, wanted to hear a little bit more about the whole agent process and how you choose an agent and why you might change an agent.
Yeah.
Yeah, so why the change? Yeah, well, it was, I've had 3 agents actually. So I had an agent prior to Rebecca Friedman, who represented and sold Night of the Living Res to Tin House, Fire Exit to Tin House, and a 3rd book to Viking, which is out 2026, 2027, I believe, and is nonfiction. So I'm not a one-trick pony. No.
We'll be
we'll
waiting
see.
for the
Yeah,
we'll be
yeah.
waiting for the
Yeah,
play.
yeah. But my first agent did nothing for me because I had the story collection. And when you query an agent and you say you have a story collection, it goes in one ear and then out their nose, and they're like, "But do you have a novel?" You know. And I had a version of this, and it was one of the rewrites attempts over the years, and I sent it to her, and she'd read like 40 pages of it, and then was like, "Okay, can you fix this?" And I was like, "How can you tell me what to fix when you haven't finished it?"
Right.
You know.
Right.
And then she also had the audacity. I hope you're listening. No, I'm just kidding. We're fine. We're fine.
She's hiding behind those
yeah.
books over there.
But to say like this is there's something about this that strikes a very like newish Marilyn Robinson or something like that. And I was like, then why aren't you like? I was like, what the hell's the matter? I don't know. I was like, I don't understand. But I fired her, and then I didn't have an agent. You know, I had the story collection, but then my mentor introduced me to Rebecca Friedman, who had been her agent, who she had left and then gone back to, and then left and then has gone back to. And she read the book. She was like, "Oh yeah, I can sell this." And she's like the most down-to-earth person imaginable. And in 2 years we sold, 2 years we sold 3 books. You know, that's pretty impressive to do. You know, so like my 3rd book is under contract. You know, and it's like.
3 different books, not 3 of the same book.
No, not through the same book. Yeah, no, that'd be bad.
Right.
But I realized, or I started to have this feeling that there was a glass ceiling coming. And I'm not trying to say, you know, that like, you know, her agency represented a lot of romance writers. And, you know, just didn't have the things that were equipped for the stuff I was writing, even though she was able to sell my work. She was great at selling. But it wasn't like being represented by, like having like she didn't have, I think, the reach that other agents would have in certain areas of literary fiction or commercialized literary fiction. And so we had to break up, and that was actually really hard. I remember I spent all day writing an email, like the email, which was not very long, and like it was like a breakup. You know, we check in now and then, but it was very, very hard. Plus, she had moved to Portugal actually too. Her business is still like in the U.S., but she moved to Portugal.
Working remotely.
Yep. And I don't blame her for getting out of this country, but like, well, I can't leave because my ancestors are here. But like, I left because I saw that ceiling coming, and I was like, well, we haven't made any progress with TV or film. Like I started to think about other things that I knew were out there, and people were always asking me, like, well, when's this miniseries coming out? I'm like, I don't know. And then I was like, well, who do I ask? And I went to the Jackal himself, Andrew Wiley, if anyone's familiar with him. No? Yeah, Andrew Wiley. So you can't submit there. They have to get, like, somebody invites you, like, or you introduces you, and
Like a country club.
yeah, literally. And I called them and I told them who I was, and they were like, you need to just send a message to the general garbage can, thing. And I did, but I wrote something like, Andrew Wiley knows who I am, I can assure you, and if he doesn't read this or receive this, you probably won't have a job, or something like that. Like, I did, because I was like, I had felt enough confidence in that moment to be like, I'm going to aim big, and I had always had a lot of doubt in my life, and I still do as a writer, I still carry it, but 2 hours later he called me, but I didn't pick up. I deliberately avoided his call for 2 days, and then we talked, and then I'm now represented by Jin, who is, because Andrew Wiley's 76, and he just runs the company and makes sure it's not going anywhere, but Jin is Andrew Wiley in a way, and she's wonderful.
So you're happy?
I am. I mean, because they represent 10% of writers, which means they can call somewhere and be like, well, if you don't do this and that, you're not getting Salman Rushdie's next novel, and they hang up the phone.
Right. Middle clout.
Yeah.
One more question.
I was wondering if you, as a Penobscot guy, choosing to voice the heart and mind of a white guy, if that gave you any hesitations or brought up any issues for you.
Again, I'm just going to interrupt. The question is whether you, as a native Penobscot, felt like you were like an imposter, maybe. Is that fair? Telling the story of a white.
If it raised any issues, or if it caused you any
Is
hesitations.
writing about a white person.
Was there anything there?
No. I think because one of the thing I put always first is emotion. Like, I think that's the one thing that all of us, that crosses every single divide. It doesn't matter if there's a literal boundary, a invisible boundary. Doesn't matter, culturally. There are things we may not understand, right? But we can still feel. Like, that's the one thing that I think binds us all as humans. And so, when I start in that way, that's when I look for opportunities to, like, have, like, the culture pop in, right? And that's why I feel like how you avoid being performative or being, exploitative of the other, so to speak. And I mean, he's, in a way, like, I view him as Penobscot, like, he grew up there, he knew so much about it, so it didn't feel
In
like
his heart.
Yeah, in his heart, and like, yeah, I'm like, there's pretendians, but now I'm looking for a word for when people pretend to be white. Like, is there a word for it? Like, I'm actually being serious. Like,
Passing?
no, just like who want to be white. Like, is there a word? There is. I can't think of it, but
Yeah.
yeah. But I mean, we've seen. I mean, with
Yeah.
yeah.
Huh.
But yeah, it never bothered me. I think probably because, like, we're in a period of time where it's like, you can just say whatever you want about white people if you're not white. Like, I don't know. Like, that's what I just think is, like, happening, which is not, like, right, but, like, is that messed up? And so I just was like, the artist in me was like, I can do what I want here.
Well, I think you also put it very well in the book when you said, when it really comes down to it, we're all stories.
Yeah.
That's what each person, rather than focus on blood or biology, we are all a collection of the stories that led to us.
Yeah.
And that becomes kind of common ground.
Yeah,
for all
and
those days, so.
I cribbed a little of that from N. Scott Momaday, R.I.P. Right? You know, who talked a lot about, you know, Man Made of Words, I think is the title of one of them. But how does it go? In the beginning, there was the word. So we get, you know, but thinking about language, really, you know, language is the thing that helped us find story, which, in my view, is. I have a student here who knows, and a writer, but
Extra
but
credit.
Yeah, is an entity I think that predates our existence, at least human
Exactly.
That's kind
existence.
of the tension throughout the whole book in a way.
Yeah.
Between the tension between our common humanity and what's unique about a community. You know,
What sets
those two
people
things
apart.
are-
Yeah.
Yeah. You see that when he goes over when he thinks that house is on fire.
Yep.
Right.
Right,
And how
exactly.
sort of disconnected he is until someone does recognize him.
Right. Well, we have gone a little over it, but it's been very much worth it. I'm going to close by thanking you for one thing, and it's a very seemingly minor detail in this book, but you are the first person that has ever described to me, and I knew instantly what you meant, what it's like to hear snow.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What did I say?
You talked about this the muffled,
Oh, yeah.
and how snow muffles sound, but in doing so, it becomes a sound of its own.
Yeah.
And I flashed on so many times, particularly out at night, when you're out at night and it's snowing really hard, and you can't hear it, but you can hear it. And I say that and want to expand a little bit on that too, that you have a great understanding of the natural world in your writing.
Well, thank you.
And it kept coming through, and moments where you just kind of pause and sigh and take a breath and say, yeah, I've felt that. I know what that's like.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, and place is just place is as important as character. You know, it can't exist.
Right.
We can't exist without place. Can. And
Right.
is probably
But
would be happy. No,
we
I'm just
need
kidding.
it. Yeah.
We need it.
Yeah,
We do.
right.
And
Right.
Yeah.
So on that note, I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap it up. This has been what a great night.
Thank you very
It's really
much.
been great having you. I'm going to just want to let you all know we will be wrapping up our 2024 book club schedule on November 21st with The Hidden Life of Cecily Larson by Ellen Baker. That session will be live streamed on YouTube and Facebook. Until then, Morgan, thank you.
Thank you
It's
very
been a
much.
wonderful evening. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you all for coming out tonight.
And don't forget to vote. And we'll see you all in November. Have a great night.
Yes, I think.
Thank you all.
Doing, signing. Yeah. Yeah.